Hello there, Bad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. Before we get to the list, I would like to say that tonight we will be doing Rated R Riffs again, kind of a New Year's Day version. We're going to be doing, I believe we're going to be doing 8 Crazy Nights, although that's a little bit up in the air, but probably going to be doing 8 Crazy Nights tonight. We are going to have myself, Vash, Cham, and Purity Sin, assuming that she's feeling up to it. And, come join us. It'll be fun. We get to watch Adam Sandler and Rob Snyder make horrible impressions. But now that we're through that, I would like to dive into today's thing, which is my top 10 movies of the past decade. And this is an objective. This is not an objective list. This is a personal list on stuff that I personally like. There are some award winners and stuff on here, but it's not a star-studded affair. Let's put it that way. At least not entirely one. With that, let's dive into the list. And at number 10, we have a movie that came out in 2010, which was Attack the Block, it was a little kind of indie English film with some decent special effects that sort of basically just exploded at once. Obviously, this thing was done cheap. It was done on the low. There's some actors you can spot out there, but maybe it's a bit more common in England. Maybe some of these people are like television actors and stuff, but really the ones that stick out are Nick Frost from the Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead movies, or Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead, and John Boyega, because everybody knows him now from Star Wars. But this was a film where it's funny because it's funny to see people that don't know that John Boyega is English, because when you look at Star Wars, if you're only familiar with him from Star Wars, sometimes you won't know that he has an English accent, and people that think oh, he's doing a really good English accent in Attack the Block, if they see it for the first time, nope, that's just how he speaks. He's doing the accent for Star Wars. But I do really like this. He plays the character Moses. He's a street level little thug. Attack the Block, the title, again, because it's an English film. A block in England is, a block of apartments, an apartment building, basically. Not like a city block and stuff like that. So it kind of centers around this whole apartment community. There's this kind of nice woman who's kind of nice to John Boyega. There's Nick Frost, who's kind of just like this dude that lives in one of the apartment buildings, but he's goddamn hilarious. And then obviously back to John Boyega, and he's like I said, this was kind of his first I'm on the map kind of moments for his career, because I don't think he had done a lot of stuff before this, if anything. This is ultimately, I think, a lot of what got him into his Star Wars role, which, you can say is a good or bad thing at this point, but career-wise, it was probably good for him. But this makes him shine a little bit. They do some kind of funny action. There's a lot of goofy kind of stuff in it too. It almost borders on the line of a horror comedy. Again, maybe that's also because I'm seeing Nick Frost in it as well. But it's a movie that really does show its budget in a good way, and the alien effects in this are actually really kind of enjoyable to watch, and kind of that weird sort of B-movie type way almost. They're not absurdly corny, but they're not really that effective either. And the aliens just kind of look like these fuzzy, giant black gorilla creatures with no eyes and these huge fangs and shit, and they just start landing in this apartment around this apartment building and stuff, and it's so funny to kind of see some of the stuff that happens in this movie with the way that they operate it. Again, some of it's meant to be goofy, some of it's not meant to be goofy, but overall, it's a really fun movie to watch. It has a good conclusion. It's actually a good introduction to John Boyega as a good actor. And really, it's just kind of, it was this little microcosm in 2010, but I do remember it very fondly, and that's why I put it on here. Now, the next one is a movie or I shouldn't say a movie, because there's kind of 2 cheats on this list. This one, and then another one later on. And it's really the idea, DC animation is such a good, branch of that company. They really do the kind of really good work in the animation community, and they blow Marvel out of the water. That's really DC's huge strength, and it kind of always has been. But one of the original movies from that is Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, parts 1 and 2. And this was kind of one of those things for me where I really loved the 1986 comic, the original one by Frank Miller. And this is almost a carbon copy of that. I think that's why it's not up any higher than this, because you know they do some original stuff. Like obviously they extend some stuff out, some of the lines of dialogue, some of the scenes. The fight scene between Batman and Superman at the end is extended, obviously, than from what it was in the comic books, but it still has those moments in it. But this movie, I think, is so good because Frank Miller wrote that story so well, and even the dialogue and stuff in it, and they wrote it very well. And the thing with this is it's basically just a copy paste job. And you do have to do a certain amount of work with a copy paste job in this scenario. Again, it's kind of like Zack Snyder's Watchmen in a way. But I love the original work so much that this was very good to see it just kind of come to life and be presented to me in a bit of a different format, even though it's the same information. Um, and I really do love Peter Weller as Bruce Wayne. I was kind of surprised they didn't get Kevin Conroy to do it because they had been having him kind of do other voice work not long before that. And he is so the quintessential voice of Batman for me. But when I heard Peter Weller was coming on, I'm like, okay, an older Peter Weller, I can kind of see that as being this gruff Bruce Wayne type. But he does such a good job at reading the lines of this. And he really actually does a very good job with the voice acting, and I'm kind of surprised he's not in more voice stuff. I mean, he's in some, but not an extended amount. And he seems like he would be really kind of fit that gruff old guy niche in that type of thing. But he's a great Bruce Wayne. He delivers the lines with all the gravity that they have to have. The rest of the voice cast also does a really good job. The new Robin, obviously the girl Robin. You have the guy that's doing the voice work for Superman does a great job too. You have a few others spread out in there. The Joker, the voice actor for the Joker does a great job of this, and just kind of the idea of staying true to the comic book, where it feels like you're watching a video, a movie version exactly of the pages, like the pages are laid out and they're in individual slides on a celluloid. That's what it feels like. Or on a film reel. There's celluloid film, but it's on a film reel. But both of those movies combined, which was 2012 and 2013, those films combined to tell the story of the entire comic book, and it is great. I do really love it. And again, I think it's more because I love the comic and I love the original writing by Frank Miller a lot, and that's just kind of what's translated to me. I don't exactly attribute that to the filmmaker, but it ultimately does a good job at that. Now, this is another one that, coming in at number 8, is one that I think some people might lift their eyebrow at a little bit, and that's Guardians of the Galaxy from 2014. And the reason why I put this so highly on there is because I still love to watch this movie just by itself. I don't give a shit about the rest of the MCU in terms of this, but this movie by itself, because it's a nice little confined story. There's a little bit left hanging there, but it's a little confined story. It's about all these people kind of coming together. It's a lot of funny people saying a lot of funny things. It's a great action comedy, and it has the correct amount of balance. And that's really what the problem was with the second one, is I felt the balance with good comedy and action was way, way too outweighed by the comedy. Like, the comedy was almost suffocating in that film at some points. And not to say that it wasn't all good. Some of it was bad, but the vast majority of it still hit. But the first film did that level of balance a lot better. And you had Chris Pratt coming in. He made an amazing physical transformation from what he was before on Parks and Recreation to what he wound up looking like as Peter Quill in Guardians of the Galaxy, and it is like night and day. I mean, that guy got jacked for that role, and that's how you can kind of tell people like that are committed to doing stuff. Paul Rudd did something similar, although not necessarily to the same extent with Ant-Man, but you had him coming in. You had Bradley Cooper voicing Rocket. You had Zoe Saldana. Vin Diesel coming in to voice Groot is just kind of funny, and Batista coming in to do Drax the Destroyer. And the thing with this, and also Michael Rooker is Yondu. That is so perfect on so many levels, just the hilarity of it. But having all those people come together, you had a lot of veteran actors that were going into this. James Gunn, who's very good at directing that type of humor, is going in as the director, and he did an amazing job with it. And you can look at that movie and you're like, okay, this was something that was very untested at the time. This was something that a lot of people did not have very much faith in, and it turned out being a runaway success. And that was before MCU movies were making $1 billion every time. I think they had only had two hit that, and one was Avengers. But Guardians really does it because the comedy hits. It's not comedy that's going to get old in a couple of years. It's not like that stupid Fortnite joke from Endgame that nobody's going to remember 10 years from now. It's you know, it's the humor that is plot related and it's pertinent, but it doesn't relate to the real world. It's not something like, oh, it's a meta reference or something like that, or it's a reference to something else that we know now but that is not going to age well. And it doesn't fall into that trope because the humor just works. It works very well and it works with the story, and it's kind of that classic, almost kind of slapstick humor in a way when you actually watch it. It's not so much verbally related as it is just, the physical comedy. And again, that's just, I love Guardians of the Galaxy. It really does a good job at really what its main goals were, which is kind of, again, the action comedy route. Now, the next one is, again, another Disney movie, and there's going to be a couple of those on this list because they did make a lot of big movies this year, and some of them I did like, or not this year, but this decade. And the other one, the number 7 is Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, and the reason why I have this on here is because it is the only actual Disney Star Wars movie that I think actually showed us something that was worthwhile and something that was entertaining. And I know people are going to say it's not the best movie, or that some of these other movies should be ranked above it, or maybe Guardians should be ranked above it or something like that. But Rogue One was it was the high point of Disney Star Wars. And after that, then you had all of this other stuff that just came out with Last Jedi and all that. But it kind of it's the peak of where we got to with it. But it's a good movie. It's still a good movie. It reminds me a lot of like a Dirty Dozen type of thing. It's that idea, like, again, kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy, where all these people kind of come together and they go do something, and it's amazing, and maybe not all of them live or survive, or something happens. And Rogue One is, again, one of those movies where there's a few characters that definitely stick out, and a lot of the characters have good moments. You have the droid, and he really does. I can't remember who the actor is that actually plays him, but he does a great job at the comic relief. He's hands down the best character in the entire movie. He nails down the comic relief. He lands the dry humor. The fact that they left some bloopers in with him was even better. That when there's a scene where he raises his arm and he hits Cassian Andor in the face, and that was completely unscripted. That the actor who was manipulating the suit just happened to do that, and it hit him in the face, and they kept the shot in. But again, you go down to the actor that played Cassian Andor. I think he did a relatively good job. The blind monk was something that was really good. And there were Forrest Whitaker as Saw Gerrera in there. Again, I thought was very good, but it was a plot that didn't tread on anything that was wrong with Star Wars. It didn't do what the other movies did, which was try to deconstruct something. Instead, it gave you a story that was interesting. It fit into the Star Wars mythos that we already knew, and it was kind of it was a little bit of a harken back to the world of the original, which was, again, something they did with Force Awakens, but to lesser of an effect, because they just copy pasted A New Hope, but Rogue One shines in the fact that it's not necessarily connected to anything. It can be its own little confined sphere of a story. Obviously it leads into other things, but just in terms of affecting the other stories and like viewing those in a different light, it really doesn't. It does fix a couple of things actually, with some kind of long-standing things that have happened in Star Wars. The idea that, there's a tiny little thermal exhaust port, and if you launch a torpedo down it, then you blow up something the size of a moon. People have been criticizing that for years, and they kind of explain it in this movie where Galen Erso, who's played by Mads Mikkelsen, designed a deliberate fault in the system because he didn't want to do it for the Empire, and they basically forced him, and he just kind of screwed around with it and tried to draw it out for as long as possible. And eventually he just installed something in the actual machine that could be used against it in a fatal way. And it explains that plot point away so well in just the idea like, okay, this is believable now because the Empire are assholes, so we kind of get it. Um, but the only, I mean, there are drawbacks to Rogue One as well. The main character of Jyn Erso is extremely bland. She's basically only there for plot reasons. The story structure is relatively predictable. The character deaths are not, well, not really graphic. They're not unexpected at a certain point. After a certain point in this, you kind of realize like, oh, yeah, they're winning this, but eventually they're going to get screwed. Also, the Darth Vader hallway scene is you that the 7 on this is almost exclusively worth that alone, um, because that goddamn hallway scene is amazing, and it finally shows Vader in a live action format, how powerful he is, where he just wrecks these guys, and he's just snapping necks and throwing people around the room and stabbing guys with his lightsaber and deflecting blaster bolts. It's fucking amazing. Um, so that's Rogue One. At number 6 is my second little cheat here, which is Avengers Infinity War / Endgame. And obviously 2018 and 2019, respectively. Now, with this, I did it because it's basically one movie. They filmed it concurrently, then they split it in half at a point, but this is basically just one long movie, and that's what it is. That's all it is just one long movie. And that's why I'm counting it as the one. So it's basically just a 5.5 hour film. But both of those movies together makes an epic, epic, epic film. It was the perfect cap off to everything that had come before it. I'm all for Thanos hitting Carol Danvers in the face with the Power Stone on repeat. And I really the Russo brothers have done such a good job for the most part on all of the Marvel films that they've done, and so the ones that they've done are some of my favorites. You have, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Civil War has its hiccups, but then you go to Infinity War and Endgame, and it's such a great send off. It's so satisfying for people that have been following those characters, since the late 2000s, when Iron Man and all those films were coming out. And it's a great send off for those older characters that we kind of, we get to watch them kind of go off into the sunset, whether they die, whether they retire or whatever, somehow get written out of the story. It just felt like that was such a great cap to everything that had gone on before it, and the Russo brothers just know how to nail it. And the other thing is that those two movies especially is like, people used to complain about, when Joss Whedon did the first and second Avengers, more for the second, but they would complain about the Whedonism of the writing, which is basically just this very snarky kind of, back and forth type of writing where it's kind of one of those things like, yeah, maybe you can simplify that line a little bit, maybe you can trim that down, maybe that doesn't need to be there. It's kind of like a very wordy, like second or third draft of a script that kind of needs to get cut down a little bit. That's really what his dialogue feels like. And the Russo brothers were kind of able to do the opposite. They were kind of able to trim the fat off of kind of that Whedon-esque humor and spread it so more thinly throughout the plot, so that it doesn't feel like it's just a joke a minute type of stupid thing. Where, Infinity War had so much gravity to it, and then the ending to it, the cliffhanger that a lot of people were not expecting. And then you go to Endgame, and Endgame is just one of these things like, what are we going to get in Endgame? Nobody realized that, the advertising for it was great because they didn't show anything beyond the first 10 minutes. There's so much in both of these films that was such a service to fans that, people got to see the bigger universe, people got to see all of this stuff going on, all these characters that we hadn't seen interact before were now interacting with each other. We get to see like what happens to all of the people and stuff like after Thor Ragnarok and after, Spider-Man and all those movies took place. How are these people getting brought back together again, or what's going to happen because of what happened in Civil War. There was a lot going into this, and ultimately I was very pleased with both of these films combined in what they did to kind of end the MCU. Unfortunately, now it looks like they're going to be dragging it to the point where eventually it will be driven so far into the ground that it will be at the Earth's core. But That's my number 6. So that's the last cheat. Everything after this is pretty different, and you're going to notice a significant difference with the top 5 as opposed to the bottom 5, because the top 5 are a lot are kind of where all the blockbusters sit. Guardians of the Galaxy, Rogue One, Infinity War, Endgame, that kind of stuff. Not to say that the films above this didn't make money, but they weren't necessarily the Disney films. Actually, I do not have any Disney films in the top 5. At least I believe so, even though they own one of them now, technically. Um, and at number 5, we have Logan. And the reason why I chose this should be pretty obvious. I'm a big fan of Hugh Jackman in the Fox X-Men universe. I think he embodies the character of Wolverine because of how long he has played the character and how well he has played the character. I feel bad that he had to last through that kind of era of shit X-Men movies, with like Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine and stuff like that. But the thing is that his body of work, ultimately, the films that he's been in have been more good than bad. X1 and X2 are instant classics. I really do love the Wolverine as well, and X-Men Days of Future Past, even though unfortunately that led into Apocalypse and other stuff like that. But really, his swan song to Wolverine is Logan, and Logan is such an amazing film in the sense that nobody thought this film was going to be what it was in terms of like when they were. I mean, they knew what it was going to be, but they didn't think. Initially when this was announced, nobody thought this thing was going to be rated R, but they were pushing for it, obviously. But thankfully, Deadpool kind of changed the ideas of Fox at the time about making a rated R superhero film. And Logan needs to be rated R because it needs to portray the brutality of Wolverine, the real brutality of him that you can't do with PG-13. He's shoving his claws through people's heads. He's cutting people's arms and limbs and shit off. This isn't him decapitating a robot where there's no blood or maybe there's a little oil or something or hydraulic fluid that comes out of him. No, he is killing people, and it is bloody as shit. And James Mangold does a great job at kind of directing this, and that's why I really was excited for this too, because he also directed The Wolverine. Even though the ending of that film is a little shaky, the vast majority of it is a great film. And I think that he learned from that, and I think that's what we see in Logan, is we see that this was a story that he just wanted to tell. This didn't really have anything to do with the main X-Men universe, but this was something they wanted to put out there. This is essentially, it's kind of like a one-shot, even though it's still the same Wolverine that we've known. But you have all the kind of the tragic stuff. You have Wolverine. His healing factor isn't necessarily working right anymore. It's getting harder and harder for him to actually heal himself. He might die. Then you have Charles Xavier, who's like losing his mind. He's like losing his mind to dementia. He has like these horrible fits where his mental powers just lose their fucking shit. It's sad. It's sad when you watch it because it's like for people that were fans of the Fox X-Men universe, especially those early films, to see Wolverine and Professor X kind of reduced to this, it's very sad. But you kind of need it for that swan song. You need it to kind of convey like this is the end. This is the end. We're gonna go out with a bang. And really, watching Hugh Jackman in this movie, especially at the end of the film where he finally comes back as the old Wolverine in like a feral, horrible rage, is one of the best scenes, I think, in superhero cinema. And then his eventual fight and his death. But, I mean, Hugh Jackman just, if he left it off at Logan, if he decides he doesn't want to come back or anything like that, if he left it off at Logan, I would never have a problem with anything. Period, if he didn't want to come back. Although I still would like to see him come back for maybe one MCU movie. That would be really sweet. And put him in the damn costume this time. That's my other only complaint about the Fox X-Men universe, is put him in his actual costume. But yeah, Logan, 2017, an amazing movie. Also, if you watch, they also have I think it's called the noir cut of it, where it's all black and white, and that is also amazing. But now we move down to number 4, and this one is kind of a backwards one for me because I usually don't put DiCaprio films on here because I don't like him that much. But this is The Revenant. And The Revenant is one of those movies where there's maybe 10 minutes of actual dialogue in it. maybe 10 minutes. Probably might even be under that. But it's, I think it's a 2 hour movie. It's either 1 hour, 45 minutes, or 2 hours. It's probably closer to two. But it feels so different because there's no dialogue and you're just kind of watching these actors sort of physically act. There's nothing that, you know, there's nothing that shows how a really good actor is than by noticing their physical acting. You can deliver your lines like, you're in a Shakespearean play, but if you can't physically act out with those lines, then your performance is going to be wooden as hell. Because half of it is the body language. And when you look at this type of a movie where DiCaprio just does an amazing job at just portraying this guy who's just he gets mauled, but the bear mauling scene. Okay, let's just get this one out of the way. The bear mauling scene is probably the most realistic and brutal animal attack scene I have ever seen in a film. Next to people putting in stock footage of actual fucking animal attacks, it is so brutal to watch him get maimed by the grizzly bear. And it's a little funny too, because the idea is like the grizzly bear like mauls him a bunch, and then it's just gonna leave him alone. Then it's just gonna leave. It's like about ready to turn around, and he just turns around with a knife and starts like stabbing the shit out of it. It's like you just reduced yourself. I can understand it because it's the idea that like okay, he's under like an adrenaline rush, and he just took out the knife and started stabbing the shit out of it because it's not biting him for a second, and I kind of get that, but it's kind of funny. Like the thing's gonna go away. He's like, no, you son of a bitch, you come back here. Despite the fact you just ripped a purse-sized hole in my back, but it's a great movie. Tom Hardy also does an amazing job in that film. As kind of the shitty douchebag character. But, I mean, he does have a good backstory, too, where, the idea that he's been, he almost got scalped by the Indians. He wears, like, this cloth around his head so you can't see, like, all the scars and shit. And, just going back to that, the final showdown that they have where they're both, like, cutting and slicing each other and everything like that. The fact that, Leonardo DiCaprio has this, adopted, or not adopted, but this Indian son, or half Indian son who, he sees gets murdered right in front of him and stuff like that. It's really good. They don't, this was also all filmed, according to them, in ambient lighting. There was no lighting that was used for this, at least not for the outdoor scenes. And it's actually really surprising how good it came out. I'm assuming that it's the direct result of a lot of post-editorial work in terms of just manipulating the way the light looked during the scenes. Otherwise, it would be a lot more choppy. But honestly, The Revenant is an amazing film. It's not a film that you can sit through repeatedly, but it was deserving of a lot of the praise that it got, at least as far as I was concerned. And now going into one that I kind of have issue with, but I don't, and even though it's very high on this list, and that's number 3 is Mad Max Fury Road. Now, when Mad Max Fury Road came out in 2015, I did not give a shit about this movie. Like, I didn't go see it in theaters. I didn't really care about it. I saw, like, oh, it's Tom Hardy. Whatever, where's Mel Gibson? I actually kind of wanted to see like an old man Mel Gibson movie as Mad Max. That would have probably been really entertaining. But, it's like, oh, they recast Mad Max. Screw this. It's going to be like everything else. I knew that George Miller had directed it as well. So that gave me a little bit of faith in it. But then people started telling me like, oh, no, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. And I went and watched the movie. And the first time I was kind of lukewarm on it. But I've watched it more since then with people that hadn't seen it. And it grew on me over time where, like, I get it. It's supposed to be kind of like it's the Silent Max. I love the first Mad Max. It's probably my favorite out of the series. And ironically, it's the one where Max is the most talkative because he doesn't say a lot of stuff in Road Warrior. He doesn't say a whole shit ton of stuff in, Thunderdome. And he doesn't say a lot in this. But he gets enough across, and it's kind of interesting to see, because it definitely feels like you're going right back into that Mad Max universe, except with a budget. And you feel at home there, because it's George Miller. He's constructed everything exactly how it should look. He knows what he's doing. He's a veteran director, and he's going back to the franchise that ultimately put him on the map. So there's a lot of stuff there that kind of brings this movie to a level of, where the fans love it so much. Then, of course, you have Charlize Theron as Furiosa, and she does an amazing job as well. Even though she's more talkative than Max, you understand a bit more about her through this, which again, Max is supposed to be kind of like just this wandering soul. So he just interacts with various people. And Furiosa happens to be one of those people, and you get that. But when they're actually doing their race, when they're trying to escape, when they're actually racing away from people and trying to get away, and it's a lot. Again, it's a lot like the Road Warrior in the sense that it's kind of just like this constant chase, where almost the entire movie from beginning to end is taking place during action, and it's not boring. And that's really something that attests to George Miller's directing style, because to make action at that extent not boring, action that never stops in a 2-hour film is impressive. Because normally that shit'll get boring by like the 45-minute mark. You're like, okay, when is the opening action sequence going to end and people are going to start talking, or are we just going to watch fireworks for the next 45 minutes to an hour? And so now that you kind of get the idea of it, there were a few people that I saw that threw out some theories about it, like, oh, all the people coming after him, like the 4 horsemen, or 3 of the horsemen are coming after them, and Max is the 4th horseman, and stuff like that, which were kind of interesting. But really, it's a George Miller insane Mad Max movie. It just needs to be balls to the wall and crazy. And like I said, Tom Hardy, I think, does a really good job at playing Max. I think that it would be nice to see him come back to the role again, or if you could get Mel Gibson back for an old man Max movie, please, before the man is dead. That would be really awesome. I don't want to turn it on like Indiana Jones, where at some point we're just going to have Harrison Ford in a wheelchair. But Mad Max Fury Road, that's the only kind of little thing that I have wrong with it, is that I would have rather had Old Man Max, but I can't fault the movie for that, because they do Max very well. They just replaced the actor with Tom Hardy. Ultimately, that's my number 3. Now, my number 2 is one that I've talked about in one of my movie spotlight videos, so I'll kind of just go lightly over this, and that is Interstellar, with Matthew McConaughey, Casey Affleck, Jessica Chastain, Michael Caine, the list goes on. And really, with this movie, it was such a good science fiction film, and that's kind of the thing that separates my 3 through 10 with my 1 and 2. Is my 3 through 10, I had problems with some of those movies. Even though I thought they were still good, though some of them had kind of little, I could nitpick them a lot. My top 2, I can't really nitpick. And the reason why I can't nitpick Interstellar is because even though the ending, you have the whole thing where they go in it's a theoretical physics thing. Like, I get it. Like, it's working with paradoxes and stuff like that. Like, oh, everything happens because of X, Y, and Z, and this had to happen, and this had to happen for that to happen. And it's kind of, it's a logic loop almost in some ways. But I don't mind that, because everything leading up to it was still really, really fun to watch. And like I said, Matthew McConaughey does an amazing job in this. Anne Hathaway does a great job. Matt Damon, I keep forgetting Matt Damon's in this movie. He does an amazing job. Everybody in this movie is, for the most part, are veteran actors, and they're being directed under Christopher Nolan. So you can't ask for anything better than that. You had a lot of people that obviously came over from the Dark Knight series, like Michael Caine, and it was a movie that really worked, and kind of it spoke to my inner science fiction nerd. It reminded me a lot of the first time I watched 2001. Where when I first watched it, it was kind of like, obviously you go through the whole scenes with the monkeys and crap, but once you get to like the space station and stuff like that, it's like, okay, this is really interesting science fiction. This is kind of like bordering on what I would consider to be realistic, even though it was made, again, in 1969. And Interstellar did that with me. It made me believe that this was something that could happen, in the sense that the way that they talked about it, the way they explained it, the way that they treated it in the story is like, this is a huge unknown. Everything that I had heard about the movie during the press junket was, about how they were, Chris Nolan had written this over the course of a couple of years. He had to, consult a bunch of these physics experts and stuff like that, so to try and make it as grounded as he could. And I appreciate that from Christopher Nolan. I appreciated that in his Batman movies as well. Because it's a bit of a different take. It's not going to the fantastical. Where science fiction, you can go to the fantastical. You can go to the absolute ends of the universe if you want to. Just pure, insane, crazy shit. But he chose not to. I mean, granted, it's science fiction, so it's not stuff that actually happens. But the way that it's treated and the way that it's written feels like that, and I like that about Interstellar. I like that kind of hardcore science fiction vibe. In addition to that, the movie was very emotional. The moment where Matthew McConaughey returns to the ship after the whole time dilation thing on the first planet, and he actually, they got made into a meme and everything, but where he's watching the messages from his kids, and he's literally seeing them grow up before his eyes because he lost 20 years worth of time, and he's just losing his mind because he told his kids he was going to be back in a few years or something like that, and it's been 20, and they probably think he's dead. And then he gets the last message from his daughter, who's still pissed at him despite the fact it's been 20 years. And it had real emotional moments, and Matthew McConaughey was able to pull off those moments because he's a very good actor. It's kind of sad that he hasn't worked with Nolan since then, at least not to my knowledge. I'd like to see him do another movie with him. I think that would be a good idea. But that's my number 2. And my number 1 of all time is a movie that is just pure, clean fun to me, and that is Pacific Rim. And the first Pacific Rim movie was a movie that had no business being as good as it was. You had a movie that was about giant robots beating the shit out of giant monsters. And there is almost no way that you can't make that cartoonishly, childish. But Guillermo del Toro made it to a point where you could actually take it seriously. And the fact that he put so much time into how these machines work and how this world works and how this stuff functions and how we learn about different things and about how all the systems and stuff work. I will say at the beginning there was a bit of an exposition dump that's kind of taxing, but aside from that, I don't have a problem with any of this movie. The pacing is perfect. The characters, although some of them are cookie cutter, the story is enough to satisfy what's happening on screen. Because really, the story is told more towards the physical conflict with the monsters, and then kind of explaining where those come from. Charlie Day has a kind of an awesome appearance in this. He's incredibly hilarious, and unfortunately, they kind of ruined his character for the sequel. But I really do enjoy all of the portrayals. Charlie Hunnam, this is probably, I think, his best film role. And all the Idris Elba. How did I forget about Idris Elba? Idris Elba was again one of those guys. Like, they literally just hired him on to look like a badass and give really, really awesome military type speeches, but it works. And then just the fighting, the brutality, and the little touches on the fighting. Like the fact that you gave a robot a rocket elbow so it could punch something harder. I mean, that's literally shit out of Gundam. And it's so awesome to see kind of those very, what we would consider to be Japanese type of stories with like mech suits and stuff like that being adapted for America, but not being like totally butchered into oblivion was another thing. And I think that comes from Del Toro's just his appreciation of those type of things, those type of storytelling elements that are kind of prevalent in other cultures. But he does an amazing job at it. Again, he makes everything kind of feel almost like a fairy tale with the way that the color palettes are, with the way that the world kind of operates. Some stuff literally is like a fairy tale. Look at Pan's Labyrinth or something like that, or the Hellboy movies. But this film. It's a shame that he was not able to come back and do a proper sequel. Even though I don't hate Pacific Rim Uprising. It's definitely not anywhere close to the original in any way. But it's a movie that I feel like if Del Toro had actually done it, it probably would have been a much better companion piece to the first film, because he had talked about doing it not long after Pacific Rim had actually come out. But ultimately, I think Pacific Rim works perfectly fine, though, as its own movie, because they kind of end stuff at the end of the movie, so you don't necessarily need the sequel, and that's, again, why I like the movie, is because it's a very self-contained film. Even if you do look at the sequel, you can still look at it as more or less a self-contained film, and it does what it sets out to do to an amazing extent, and I know people have told me like, really, Pacific Rim is like one of your favorite movies of like the past like 10 years. Like, it's honest. If I want to be honest, it's probably one of my favorite movies of probably the last 20 to 25 years. I really do enjoy this film from just a visual and existential standpoint, and then also Del Toro's use of actual practical effects in uh, seeing the inside of the cockpits or the control areas for the giant mechs and all the stuff like that. All those were real sets. Obviously some of it was CGI'd in. They covered up some stuff with CGI, but those actors were actually in rigs and in an actual set that looked like that. It wasn't all green screen. And again, I appreciate that from Del Toro. That's something that it goes a long way, honestly, with me when it comes to a director when they know when it's good to use CGI and when it's not good to use CGI. And that again, the ability for this movie to kind of just do a bunch of cool shit, put it on screen, make it work to a story, and give it good CGI and good special effects. That is all you can ever ask for a summer blockbuster, and Del Toro did it in spades. I'm only sorry that this movie did not make more money when it came out. I did see it in theaters when it came out, I believe twice, and it's an amazing movie. I love it. I might do actually well, actually, I probably shouldn't because a lot of people do know about this movie, even though it wasn't as appreciated as it probably should have been. But that's my list. So I don't know if you guys agree with me. If you do, if you don't, if you have problems with it, go ahead and post those down below. Or if you have a list of the top 10 movies you've seen in the last decade, I went from 2010 to the end of this year, but if you wanted to, I guess you could do like 2009 or something like that if you want to do a full 10 years. But like I said, put those thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?